Hello, Writers Guild members. Welcome to our annual And the Nominees Are panel. This year, a double feature in anticipation of the Writers Guild Awards on March 21st. I'm Dana Weissman, Director of Programs of the Writers Guild of America East. Thank you for joining us today. This afternoon, we're happy to have 5 comedy variety writers representing shows that made us laugh while keeping us informed in 2020. Quite a task. Tonight, please join us for the long form panel. That is those who brought us limited series and small screen films, and you can check your inbox for details on how to sign up for that. For this afternoon's panel, we'll have a bit of time at the end for audience Q&A, so please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to pose questions. Thanks to our partners Final Draft and Variety for working with us to bring today's panels to our membership and well beyond. And of course, thank you to our panelists and our moderator, Cynthia Littleton. Cynthia has covered the TV business for more than 20 years as a top reporter and editor for Variety and The Hollywood Reporter. She is the author of 3 books, including 2013's TV on Strike, Why Hollywood Went to War Over the Internet, the definitive account of the 2007-2008 Writers Guild of America strike. I think our members who are here would be thankful that we did that. Take it away, Cynthia.
You'd think a year in, I would know it, but I don't. Thank you everyone for joining us. We are grateful to everyone joining us out there in cyber TV land, and we're especially grateful for the panelists for taking time out. These are 5 people that work under incredibly trying circumstances in the best of times, in what we used to call normal times. But in the past year, all 5 people have delivered incredible television under extremely trying circumstances. And we'll talk a little bit about how they did that and what the future looks like for production in the late night space. I don't know how the titles are going on your screens, but I'm just going to read off our panelists alphabetical, and we'll dive in. We're starting with Kristen Bartlett, one of the head writers for Full Frontal with Samantha Bee. Thank you, Kristen, for joining us.
Thank you.
Alex Bays, head writer for Late Night with Seth Meyers. Thanks for joining us, Alex.
My pleasure.
Jenny Hagel, Jenny's Double Trouble. Jenny is the head writer for The Amber Ruffin Show and a writer on Late Night with Seth Meyers.
Hi.
Hi, Jenny.
Hi, Alex.
Michael Corman is joining us from the very quirky and intriguing new HBO series How To with John Wilson. Michael's a writer on How To with John Wilson. If we have any explainers, we'll go to Michael. And last but definitely not least, Mike Polasic, a writer for Desus and Mero, the new Showtime late night series that is absolutely one of several really important breaths of fresh air and fresh perspective in late night. And we'll definitely talk about how the perspective in late night has changed pretty significantly in just the last couple of years. But I guess where I really wanted to start, thank you all. Again, I know it's busy and it's a crazy time. I wanted to start by asking you kind of a serious question about being funny. The serious question about being funny is how is it particularly hard right now in the kind of social environment, the pop culture environment that we're in, where I think it's fair to say there's a lot of heightened sensitivity about individuality and how people are perceived and what the majority culture feels is funny versus people that have been underrepresented and maybe people that feel like they have been the butt of jokes too long. And there's a lot of big cultural conversations happening, important reckonings. And I can imagine that this is a very hard time to be funny with topical humor about things that are going on right now, because it's a very serious time and there is kind of that heightened sensitivity in the world. I throw it open to anybody. Is it hard to be funny right now?
It's always hard to be funny. I don't think that aspect of our culture is making it harder than it was. I think you were just maybe more of your attention is focused in different places than it used to be. But I think the ideal is to be punching up anyway. So I think if you run into a lot of problems with your jokes, then you were punching down to begin with. Yeah, I mean, you do have to make changes and you do have to have some awareness. And I'm an old white guy. So I've run up against a couple things here and there where I've had to go, oh, right, you can't say secretary anymore. I'm looking at Jenny because we were talking about a sketch in some meeting and we're just pitching ideas. And I was like, oh, it's a businessman. And then maybe he'll say to his secretary this. And Jenny said, did you just say secretary? I was like, I thought we're not doing that anymore. She's like, yeah, no, you can't say secretary anymore. I was like, okay, well then what's the word? Assistant. Okay, I'll change it. And then we're done and off we go and the rest of the sketch is fine. So yeah, you pay some attention, but I don't think it's super costly to comedy.
I'd love to expand on the concept of punching up and punching down in terms of how you're thinking, because I think that sounds like an interesting prism for thinking about, who you're talking about. And is that anything that other panelists have experience with in terms of thinking about along those lines?
Yeah. I mean, I've been working in late night for, almost 20 years. And I think it's harder to, exactly what Alex is saying, make the very easy, lazy choices that I feel like a lot of shows have relied on for a long time. And there were a tremendous amount of jokes in the years that I worked at TV where the joke was just that a person belonged to a group, that a character, you would just, by suggesting that a character was gay, was a punchline. And I think that that's something that it's both, in some level you're doing it because you know that the audience responds to that. And then, so I think it goes both ways, where the audience stops responding to those things and people stop doing it. It doesn't really excuse that kind of writing. But I do think that I've watched it evolve over the years. And in ways where you almost comment on it and still do it. Like people know I remember there was a time where we were writing sketches and you would talk about like, I'm not sure this is going to age well. And then you just you've got to get something in, you got to get something on, you want it to work. And then it's there and you look back on it and feel like, oh, that was, a joke on a night, it meant nothing. It was one laugh. So I definitely feel like people feel it now in a way that is really good, and where I think comedy kind of was always off the hook in terms of what it was saying, what it was just sort of saying about reality.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that you want to make sure that your targets are the people who are the most powerful. You don't want to be adding stuff into the air that's hurtful. And I think the great thing about having a full writing staff is that you can have a conversation about everything, and things that you don't know you learn, and things that you know that you can share teaches others, and it's just very collaborative. I think it's more of an opportunity than a challenge.
Yeah, I think exactly what Kristen said. And then I think that like when you are punching up, it's exactly what Kristen said. Like if your jokes are focused on people who have power, then that's satire, and you're making a comment and you're questioning like powerful institutions. And if you are making jokes of people who have less power than you, then that's just bullying. That's not anything different than what we were all like people were doing in the 4th grade. So I think the challenge is to think like, how can I use jokes to question systems that are powerful? Because doing the opposite just doesn't feel good.
It's funny too, because what those systems are, or what punching up looks like and punching down looks like, everyone has blind spots. And like watching the Britney Spears documentary, I was like my goal after that, and before that also, but my goal is always like, I don't want any jokes I write to wind up in a documentary in 15 years as like how unfair we were to a certain person, even if that person is a celebrity. Like you never know what they're going through or whatever, all that stuff. So I think that that's just like the documentary test for me now. I don't know.
It's a new shade of awareness.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Another thing.
I also think it's a consequence of staffs becoming more diverse, in the last 15 years, that you're just that much more conscious of who you're talking about. And
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
You're talking about your
exactly
peers.
the example that Alex gave was that Jenny was in the room to hear that sounding, you're right. My mother was a secretary. She would not be. My mother was a secretary in the 70s. Today, she would be an executive assistant or an administrative assistant.
Right.
Or for example, I was one when I was 31. But I think also, like, to Michael's point, I think you're right, like that it's a function of a room getting more diverse, because the joke that the example Michael used of like, you would use like somebody being gay as a punchline, like that always felt bad. That felt bad when you were making it 20 years ago to gay people. It's just that now you might have a gay person in the room who can say, or you just might have more people in a room who are aware enough to know, like, that joke doesn't feel good. I don't want to make that joke.
Yeah, the audience educates you as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, well, I was going to mention the Britney Spears, because that montage that they do of late night jokes from the white guys that once fully ruled late night. Now it's a bigger sandbox, and it reflects. I mean, it just reflects it so much. That's why the perspective of an Amber or a Samantha Bee or a Desus and Mero is just invaluable as just on a human level. Just I get so many laughs out of Amber got her show on the back of the success of the jokes Seth can't say, and her and just her own segments that just felt so fresh and new, and like this is a new era for television for sure. Let me ask you, so like I know that not only the Britney documentary, but we're seeing on social media a lot of older David Letterman, Jay Leno segments, especially with female talent, are being really reconsidered, and it sounds like that those kinds of things are you all are aware of those things going on, and does it become I don't know, limiting, but is it kind of, it sounds like you're saying like your litmus test now is you don't want your joke to wind up in a documentary about how insensitive pop culture treated a person.
Yeah, I think that's just, I mean, I hope, anyway, not to say that we don't all have blind spots and we're not all changing all the time, but I would hope that there's just a certain amount of emotional intelligence that everyone that you have in your room brings to it, and that you try to bring to it, and that the hosts bring to it, that everyone's trying all the time. I mean, something we were just talking about was having those diverse voices in the room, which is so important. And then, but also at the same time, making sure that those voices feel empowered to speak up if there's something that they want to say that's not, maybe they don't want to say it in front of the whole room, maybe they want to come to you after, and just making sure that those things are, those avenues are open to everybody, can really just help kind of quash some of the stuff that we're talking about.
Yeah, you definitely can't have the top-down writer's room that used to exist, where a lot will just give you orders and you'll do the writing. It has to very much be a safe place for your writers to go, hey, you can't say that, old man. I'm like, okay, teach me something. Yeah, it doesn't do you any good to just have diversity unless you use every part of it.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's also, oh, sorry, Cynthia.
No, please go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think there's also, and like, I think you touched on this a moment ago, but there's also this idea from, I think, some corners that like, that this somehow creates a limiting environment for comedy. And I think it's the opposite. I think like, I mean, I can't speak for everybody, but I know like a big part of like wanting to get into comedy for like me and other people that I know, like just from an emotional sense, is it's fun to tell a joke and have a lot of people laugh at it. And if you're creating stuff that doesn't make people feel bad, if you're mindful of like a lot of different groups and how this joke will feel to them, then that's just more people who will enjoy your stuff that you are making. That's more people at the party. Like, I just think I'm always confused when people are like, well, there's all these rules, and so now it's limiting. And I'm like, is that limiting to have more people enjoy what you make and to have it make more people feel good and have a good time? To me, that's the dream.
Yeah, it's more focusing than limiting.
Right.
I mean, I think of like the very old talk shows where they would make jokes about women. Like, you just left out 51% of the audience. They're mad at you now. How is that? That's you. It's limiting. You just didn't notice. So it's the awareness. It's not the limits.
For a while,
it's a really fascinating thing. I don't know how much television leads the culture or follows it sometimes, because a lot of times at its worst, comedy shows, especially, variety shows, will work off of tropes that people kind of generally agree on. And you don't want to, and there's a danger of being too far ahead of the audience, if you're just trying to tell jokes. And a lot of times, the jokes, you need some sort of like agreed upon, stereotypes for it. And when you pick the wrong ones, it ages horrendously. And people probably probably for decades have watched television feeling like, I cannot believe I belong to a group that this is our entire representation is the same punchline over and over again. And so I do think that, and sometimes as far as what television could do, you almost have to make a superior product, or there has to be like a superior comedian who can deliver something and just be recognized as like, oh, well, he's, this is a human being. I mean, like somebody like Richard Pryor or something like that. I mean, I think part of the reason why certain people become so important is that it's impossible to reduce them to the stereotype that you probably would have put them into before they, reach everybody in the way that they do. So it's a tricky thing to try to understand why it happens. I don't always know why it happens.
Yeah, I mean, well, as you said, like it can be the easy joke is writing, is writing the joke that used to be like the reliable laugh. Although, as you say now, I mean, you can't just indicating that somebody's that's not going to get a laugh. It's going to get groans and and worse. Is at some point though, do you have to kind of steel yourself? Some people may not like this. Some people may feel that this is, whether it's political or about a political figure rather than being political. Do you have to just steel yourself that some people are just going to trash, some people are going to send some nasty tweets or something, and, you just have to decide that you're going to stand by this joke kind of thing? Is it, or am I making too much in terms of like how much, am I thinking that you guys overthink this maybe?
No, I mean, I think we try to overthink it. Like we try to think through every aspect of it that we have like literal time to do. But I mean, you are going to get, like, if you are making jokes about powerful Republicans, which I think we're all doing, you're still going to get complaints. What you want is to feel like what you said is defensible and true enough that it doesn't undercut what you're doing. Seth always says that, like, I don't want to tell a joke that I couldn't tell to the person it's about. They might get mad, but I'd be able to defend it in person. That's my limit.
Isn't one of the great things? Oh, sorry.
Oh, Kristen?
Okay, for our show, I think it's about making the right people mad. I think people are going to get very angry when a woman is on television talking about politics regardless. And Twitter is going to be a pit of shit, and it always is every week. But as long as the people that we are talking about are targets that we're punching up at, and we can, again, it's like Alex said, is defensible, I think that we're fine. And we just try not to Google ourselves too often.
Yeah. Do you feel a kind of, I mean, because the host, of course, is the face of the show. There's a lot of people that think that the hosts come out and just make just spontaneously every word. Do you feel an obligation to kind of protect your host in a way?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, yeah, I can expand on it a little. We try to be very thoughtful. We want to make sure that everything that we're writing is something that Sam stands by, and she is very communicative about what she believes in, and it's definitely a process that we work together on. We don't always get it right. Sometimes she says things that get her in hot water. But again, if we can stand by it, the next week, then it's okay, But it is a responsibility towards making sure that we're saying the right thing without baiting people too.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Oh, can I say one thing just because I'm so proud of
Absolutely.
myself for having a point? I was astonished
Oh,
when I thought of it, and I couldn't wait to say it out loud and have people confirm that it's a great point. But I think one of the things that's really good for TV is that you don't need to have a massive audience like you did in the 60s and 70s. And that there was a time where like the Smothers Brothers did a show that probably would have seemed like extremely popular now. And it was very forward thinking, and they just didn't have the ratings to continue to do that. And shows that probably seem irrelevant now had massive audiences. And now you can survive making a show where the people who don't agree with you don't have to watch it, and it doesn't really matter. So you can, I think you can sort of make a show and use your conscience in a way where it doesn't affect the business side of things, which is fantastic for the culture.
That's a great point, I gotta say.
and I'm honestly impressed that you thought of it and impressed that you said it.
Right.
From outer space.
Yeah, and that you got to space.
Yes.
I actually feel terrible for having interrupted you when you had that thought, so I apologize.
Oh no. Believe me, the buildup was so exciting because people probably thought like he seemed like he had.
Yeah.
There's something tremendous was his lips were quivering. He was so proud of his little point. So just having to wait for it, I think, was great for the audience and great
You're
for us.
welcome.
I mean, I think we wrap it right there, right?
Genius! It's brilliant. I will just say that like a couple of years ago, when there was one of the vintage TV channels, I think Me TV or Antenna TV, was running old vintage Johnny Carson's, like late 70s Tonight Show, and it was just a historical time capsule. It was fascinating. And I watched many nights, multiple episodes like this going, I can't believe these jokes. I can't believe that just bringing out women in bikinis was like a punchline, or, especially the skits. Oh my God. And I'm thinking like, this is the culture. Like this was, 8-year-old, 10-year-old Cynthia was, growing up in this culture, and particularly the jokes about women. And Carson was not the most cutting at all comedian. And to your point, Carson, I think in those days at his peak was, somewhere around 10, 12 million Americans. I mean, it was a smaller population, but that was still a chunk. Now there's a lot more flavors to choose from at the late night ice cream shop. And as a viewer, it's exciting. It was exciting when Sam P came out. It's been exciting to see Amber Ruffin. It's been, to see shows like, a show like yours, Michael, How To with John Wilson, which is very, very kind of just such a fresh take on information and like looking at slices of culture. Can you talk a little bit about how that show came to be?
Sure. Oh, well, the style of the show, John Wilson is a documentarian who lives in Queens, and he was making these short documentaries in that basic style for years. And he was putting them on Vimeo and showing them at film festivals. And Nathan saw some of his work, and they talked about whether this could be adapted into a longer form show, because I don't think he'd made anything that was full half hour yet.
I had never heard by Nathan, you mean Nathan Fiedler?
Oh, Nathan Fielder. I'm sorry. So Nathan and I worked on a different show together. And then, so then the idea was just to expand John's style into a show that was bigger and was about certain themes. And could you still document what's happening in New York and let that part of it be completely true, and still try to be funny and make jokes while not bending reality in any way. It was the idea.
I had no idea what I was tuning into, and the scaffolding was the first episode that I had no idea what I was tuning into, and it was
oh, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I had no idea if anybody would respond to his style. I was, for the longest time, felt like people are going to be confused. Like, do we have to explain what's going on? That he's sometimes using images as a metaphor, and that what you're looking at is not the thing he's describing, but that, and other times it is. And But I was astonished it didn't really need any explanation. It seemed like whoever was going to like it seemed to understand it right away.
It also felt very perfect for quarantine times, like where we're kind of interested in learning little microscopic bits about things. Like it was perfect for people that are, scrolling and looking for something they haven't read or something fresh.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I that part of that, when you're editing it, like by the time it airs, you never want to look at it again. So it's hard for me to look at it now and understand and see how it came across. But yeah, the only person who I showed it to before, was my family, and my mother. Her only response to it was she was almost angry because she was like, "You can't do anything else. You have to pay attention to the whole thing." And I was like, "This is a disaster. Like this is not." That's like I've shown it to one person, and she's like tired by the end of it. So I was just happy, honestly, that people were into John's style, because I think it's something that it's like his life. He's obsessively documenting. He films all the time, and he really believes in it. It's a way of life of collecting footage and having it there and preserving it. So to me, it's all about using like what he naturally does and trying to shape it into something that you can it looks and feels like a TV show.
Mm-hmm. Jenny, you also had the experience of launching a show in the last year in undoubtedly, it's never easy to launch a show, but particularly trying times. Can you talk a little bit about how the Amber Ruffin show came together and what were some of the challenges of pulling it together in COVID times?
Sure. I think the challenges are probably the same challenges we're all experiencing, which is like trying to feel close to people. I think like so much of being in a writer's room is like camaraderie and like the casual kind of joking around that happens that sometimes sparks a bit. So I think that part of it has been challenging. And so I think we've done our best to kind of like, whereas I think like in the before times, I loved writers, any kind of writer meeting or pitch meeting that was very efficient. And I think now we kind of like hang out and chat a little bit more when we all get on Zoom before we actually get down to business. And in a weird way, I think that helps because we're missing that in-person connection with our writing staff. And so it kind of helps a little bit to be like, how's everybody's week going? What's on your mind? What did you know? And we kind of chit chat. And in a way, it helps me get a sense of like what's on everybody's mind. What are people reacting to with the news? So I think that like just that, that in-person connection that we're all feeling all the time is the challenge. But I think a weird silver lining to it has been that not having a studio audience, I feel like in a weird way has allowed us to carve out the voice of the show on our own instead of having to do it by committee, which isn't to say that like I don't respect the reactions of an audience. Like the audiences are very helpful to have, but I think in a way it's allowed us to decide first, what do we want to be? And then let's see how an audience connects with that and adjust from there. Does that make sense? Because I think like when you were saying before, like, do you run the risk of like making certain people mad with this joke or that joke? Sometimes at the end of the day, I think there's no such thing as a joke that's for everyone. So sometimes at the end of the day, you have to choose like, this joke, we like this joke. This joke says something we want to say. It's silly in a way that we love, or it's smart in a way that we love, or it communicates a point we want to communicate. And whether or not everyone gets it, there'll be 5 people having a great time when they hear this joke. You know what I mean? And it's okay. I think it allows you to make a few more of those choices. Whereas like if you said a joke like that in front of a studio audience and then you hear silence, sometimes what it communicates to a viewer is, oh, that joke died, or that was a bad joke. Instead of maybe that was a joke that was like, this joke's for everyone. This joke about the hedgehog on roller skates is for everybody. Yeah. This joke about that obscure law from the 1850s that only a few people know about, that joke's for 3 nerds. You're welcome. And it allows you to kind of make both choices and not feel like a weight of like success or failure on each one.
The applause-o-meter.
Yeah.
Is your plan to eventually, though, when we can go back to such things, is your plan to have a studio audience, or might you not?
I think that's our hope. I mean, God willing, yeah, that's our hope.
Yeah.
How many?
Try it.
What's that?
I'm sorry. What did you say, Alex?
I said at least try it.
Yeah,
you might like it. Very weird that we're all going back to having a studio audience and you've never had one. But
right.
What a little fascinating little experiment.
Yeah, we'll have to fold the audience, the concept of an audience and the reactions into what we already do. You're
gonna have to cut so much. That makes me sad. There'll be
a
little less of it because you have laughs.
I mean,
you'll be all right.
How many of you are you all still working remotely? Are your writers all still getting together on Zoom?
We're a mixed bag. Because we have a lot of writers in stuff, in sketches and on the show and shooting pieces. So I've been in probably 75% of the shows since October-ish. And we have writers coming in here and there. But mostly everybody's remote. Some people are out of state, out of the country. We have one writer who's in Korea. So we are waking her up at 4 a.m. to get her jokes. It's very, but it's all,
Is she visiting Korea or somebody who lives full-time in Korea?
There's family there. And so she's been there since like last March. It's wild, but making it work.
By all accounts, Korea wasn't a bad place to be South Korea was not a bad place to be in the midst of this, this pandemic.
Yeah. Oh, she made the right call. We should all be there now. We should have all gone.
Jenny touched on a little bit of it, but anybody else have any thoughts about, the pros and cons of trying to do a collaborative thing in Zoom? As we've all shown here, it could, the lag time, it may just be seconds, but it can, we don't have those same clear social cues for when somebody is starting and stopping.
There are definitely, oh, sorry, Mike, do you want
to? No, you go.
There are definitely challenges, but I think our show is going to be remote at least through the rest of the year. And I think we like it. It's nice that people are in different places. And I think look, the past year was very hard, but I think now we're starting to think about lifestyle in addition to work. And so there is this commitment to also thinking about what does the real world look like outside of, the work that we do on the show. And that's been a great benefit. I mean, I think I exercise more, I eat better now that I'm like always around, and I certainly take many more naps, which is also nice as well. So those are the benefits. It's definitely harder to bounce ideas off of each other, but I think we kind of have gotten the hang of it, and we really make a lot of use out of Slack as well. Slack is the place for those quick, stupid thoughts.
Yeah, I'm like, kind of off of what Jenny was talking about, I'm allergic to meetings just as a rule. Like I hate meetings. And so at the beginning of this, we were all under a lot of stress. We were figuring out how the show was going to go remote, all this stuff. And we would get on the Zooms and I'd be like, okay, what are the 3 things we need to talk about? Like, let's do it. And then we would talk about those 3 things and all meetings would be 7 minutes long and it was great. But then it did become very clear very quickly that we needed to like speak to each other and stay connected a little bit. And like, we can't do everything on Slack. Like we have to actually talk to each other. So I've had to get a lot more comfortable with long meetings and stuff like that, which has been, I think, good for me, good for everybody. But we've been just making time off of what Jenny was saying, making time for those like, hey, how's everyone doing today kind of moments, and like running a meeting in such a way where like there is a space for people to speak up, which is, like we were just saying, harder on Slack than it even is in the room for maybe a lower level writer or someone who's like who's there to just kind of weigh in on some research stuff, but they need to say something, but they don't feel, you have to like really make the space in those Zoom rooms. And be a little more conscious of it. And I feel like I'm still learning kind of a year in. So hopefully soon I will not have to learn about Zoom etiquette anymore, but we're all working on it.
Do you have any, we're seeing, hopefully positive signs in New York, positive signs in LA. Do you have any ETA for getting back to kind of what I'd call full strength in the studio with your full complement of producers?
For us, we're eyeing later in the year, but it's the whole time. It's just been like when it feels safe. And obviously we have to plan ahead. We don't want to make the decision and then have people had a hiatus coming up and they have to work the entire hiatus to figure out how we're going to get back, that kind of stuff. So we're eyeing kind of later in the year and just keeping an eye on everything. And I think, we've been shooting more in person, like sketches and short pieces and stuff like that with like testing, figuring out how to do it safely outside and all that stuff. So that's been good, but we're just kind of like wait and see a little bit for our show.
Yeah, I think, you know, a lot of us have figured out, or our shows have figured out how to do this remotely. So we're not scrambling to get everybody back as quickly as possible. We'll just like, when it seems safe, like, yeah, in due time. And if, you know, if we want to have people back May 1st and somehow it doesn't work out till May 15th, that'll be fine. we have the infrastructure in place now. But yeah, nobody's talking dates. I haven't heard anything like that. Not yet.
Let me ask you about the other big factor that has changed in the last 12 months. Huge factor in seemingly in the comedy world is the departure of our 45th president from the White House. That was obviously, you know, he was a source of material that, you know, probably unlike any other previous president. I doubt that there's many people that are too, well, I shouldn't say that. I should say, I doubt that there are, you know, I doubt that there are too many people on late night shows that are on a human level sorry to see President Trump go, but is there any professional level where like this guy was the gift that kept giving? I see the head swiveling.
No, I did. He wasn't, to me at least, I can only speak for myself. He wasn't a gift at all. I didn't think he was helpful for generating information, both on a comedic level. I feel like so much of comedy is about heightening. He was as ridiculous as a person can be, and like so many news stories about him were the joke version you would make up of an incident. So often I'd be like, I don't know where to go with this. It's already so insane. And then on a human level, it's like he was a stressful president to have. It's not easier to write when you're stressed out. It's not easier to find a funny angle on a story that like has a real hard human impact on people. So yeah, I don't know. I think there is this idea that he was good for comedy. And for me, at least, I don't feel like that on any level. I think he was a bad person and I'm never going to have fun. Like, it's never going to be like, oh man, this guy's creating so much suffering. Let me get in there with my jokes. Like, I just didn't. I think to me, it is a true relief.
Yeah.
Not to be contrarian. I mean, I do still consider him my president.
Yeah.
Oh, well,
I think what he offered, no, I mean, I think the anxiety he created is terrible for comedy. But what was fascinating about him is I thought for the longest time, like we would use him in sketches and as a character and when I worked at Conan, and I really thought he was a funny person. Like I thought it was impossible that he didn't have a sense of irony about the stuff he did and the character created. So when it started, I was so naive and I thought like, oh, this is going to be some sort of self-serving bit that he's doing, and he's doing it for publicity. And then you just sort of slowly slide into this total like sense of like nausea all the time and just stomach turning fear that this is like entire democracy is ending. So to me, like the advantage of being able to write a few jokes like about this subject that's constantly overwhelming everyone's thoughts is like such a tiny little benefit to the awful experience for 4 years.
Yeah, it was very non-helpful to be, our show's on at 12:30 in the morning. So we were like the 10th show you watched that day who only talked about that guy. And so it actually, even for the jokes, it was harder because he said in the morning that he wanted to buy Greenland. And then every show all day long made jokes about it. And then now you do one, but make it different. Well, shit. And you can't talk about anything else because nobody heard anything else. That was the exhausting thing. It's been so great just the last month or so when there's like 5 top stories.
Right.
You're like, oh shit, we get to choose. We can leave one out. This is great. I will say the only time it was fun is when he was running but was gonna lose. That was great. That was very fun. And then something bad happened and I don't remember anything else.
I will say that I think maybe the best day of my life in like the last 4 years was one day Alex walked into the writer's room at late night and said, we are taking a break from Trump. We are doing no Trump jokes tonight in the monologue. Everybody just please submit monologue jokes that have nothing to do with Trump. And then I think Seth intro, right? He set it up that way. He was like, we're just not doing any Trump joke. It was like a particularly awful week of news where the news was particularly awful and hurtful and stressful and sad. And it was just all like, a man in Florida married a sandwich. And like just the dumbest, like Kesha has new shoes. Like every setup was just, and it was like the loveliest day. It felt like you got to like take a breath before you like dived back into the cesspool.
Yeah, it was, but it was that thing where you're like, oh, there are no B stories under Trump. There's like the A story, and then there's F. There's like Taco Bell's new offering. There was no like, another politician is doing a different thing. It's like, no.
Yeah. Where he just kind of sucked the air out of the room and became the ultimate cheap joke. Like you knew you could get a laugh some way, even if it was maybe not the freshest laugh or what. Yeah, I can see where it is just like all of us. Like it feels like we have just a little more headspace to think about, like climate change and public education and
And what ruins it is that he likes being talked about so much that even to ridicule him is giving him a certain kind of pleasure. It's
a kind of oxygen for sure.
I think that was something that before I even worked at Desus and Mero that really attracted me about them is that like watching their previous show and stuff was just, they would talk about Trump if they felt like it, but they didn't feel any obligation to. And if it was funny enough, sure, great. It's not. And then when we've been doing the show for the past couple of years, and we would go a couple episodes without mentioning him, and there would be some other story that was like huge news for us, like something that happened with Tekashi 6ix9ine or something like that, and that was the big story. That was like our Trump for a while, and that kind of stuff. And it was really like just such a kind of joy and we heard from people too that they just loved watching the show because they didn't have to worry about him. And we would, I mean, not that we never talked about him, we talked about him all the time, but it was like certainly less than sometimes on other shows or other, like you didn't feel that obligation like we have to kind of.
We definitely felt the obligation that we had to. So being a political show, and very often we would have an act or a topic set up that we had written that we were very excited to cover. And then on Wednesday when our show airs, he would just do the worst possible thing. And then we would find ourselves crashing a new act. And it has been a great joy to not have that burden. I know that there will be moments when we're doing that, but it's been a real privilege to be able to talk about everything else. It's great.
Yeah, off of that, there were times at the show that I worked at before where you felt like you were in a newsroom, like you felt like, exactly what you were saying. Like at 4 p.m. he's giving a speech, and that's the show tonight, and everything that we tape at 4:30, and that's exciting to be a part of. It's really fun sometimes. It's not like it was a very cool. There were very cool moments in that, but it was cool to also not have him be the assignment editor, as everyone says.
Do you find that you have to sort of retrain your staff mentally a little bit? Like you can write stuff ahead of time now. I feel like we all got in the habit of just waiting. It's like, oh, he's got a speech at 3.
Right, something happened.
There's no
now, like, oh, you can write something Monday that we air Wednesday, and it'll still make sense. Delightful.
We think of late night as so much, joke writing, stacking a monologue, having those great clips, but all of your shows in varying degrees, and how to is a little different, but all of your shows have sketches, segments, funny bits that are outside of the host desk talk, guest. Can you talk about developing those and crafting those? Do you see those as kind of are they sort of part and parcel of the show, or are they sort of special things when inspiration strikes you, like, oh, this would be good for a bit, but the day-to-day grind, the meat and potatoes of the show is monologue and the kind of the jokes? How do you kind of separate the two different types of work in your organizations?
Well, we are, pretty dialed into a monologue and then a closer look, which is a good 12 minutes on a short day. So our struggle is always to find space in the show for those. I mean, we want that. When we started the show, we didn't have the closer look, and the whole idea was going to be Seth as sort of a ringmaster and just bringing people in for sketches and characters and film pieces. And then closer look happened, and that stuff kind of got shunted a little bit. And it's, you know, it's an eternal struggle to find the balance and to find the time in the show. But our hope is that our show is all those colors at the same time. It, you know, it rarely actually happens in terms of balance. You know, you want like a monologue with a piece in it, like a drop in or something, and then a little sketch, and then a closer look, and then something else. And then, you know, things expand and contract, expand. And you don't always get all the M&M colors that you want. But that the dream is, yes, that the show is all the things.
For our show, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, because Mike and I were talking before this started about Brian Stack, who was a longtime Conan writer who is at Colbert now, and but Conan, it's interesting how sometimes the late night show itself is such a reversal of whatever came before it, because originally Conan's whole desire was just simply to make it no one to compare him to Letterman, and the show became very, very written and very character driven, cartoonish. And then I think Seth very wisely transformed it into something that is like extremely topical, extremely relevant, and in a way that it was almost a badge of pride when Conan was doing the show. If you could come up with a comedy piece that would make it unnecessary to do a monologue, if he could come out and do a fake joke that would be then derailed, and you could get in, you could have Bob Costas come out and start doing like a play-by-play of a deconstructed thing. That was always like the point. And this third act sketch was always like the thing that you were looking forward to. Like that's the end. Brian was always like my favorite person who just if you cut to the audience and he was there, it's like you're just excited because it was like celebrating irrelevance. But I feel like that now that it's more important to kind of talk about life. That sort of does seem to becomes a smaller and smaller part of the show.
For our show, it's like we could just do we call it the A block, which is our version of the monologue, which is the guys watching stuff and riffing on it with each other. And it's so we could do that for a half an hour every, twice a week and get away with it because they're so funny, and they're so good at what they do. And like it's, but we also kind of want to show off like what else they can do too, and put like Jesus describes our writing staff, and I thought this was very apt as like he gave an interview where he said he and Mero are the water and the writing staff is digging irrigation ditches to get them to where they need to be, which is like exactly how to think of it for our show. It's like we are just there to create spaces for them to play in and do fun stuff, and sketches are like premises that are going to allow them to riff with each other and all that stuff. So that's really fun. But our show could totally just be them riffing with each other, and it sometimes it is like, and it's great. It's like so fun. But we also just want to like kind of see, I remember when I interviewed for the job and they were asking me about what I wanted to like, what I wanted to bring to the table. And I was like, well, I'll like pitch you sketches and I'll give you lots of options and all this stuff. And I was like, we're not going to like, you're not going to be in some like big 17th century wig or something, like in some cut to like 2 years later, they're both playing Beethoven on a Zoom call, like in a sketch, because there was some rumor online that Beethoven was black. And so we did this Verses sketch where Heaven Nagatu pitched, which is so funny. And so like they are able to do so much stuff, and it's been really fun to like figure that out with them essentially on our show.
Yeah, and show, like you say, show their chops.
Yeah, exactly.
And Kristen, with your with Sam B being upstate, I imagine that you're a little challenged in terms of getting being able to have kind of the assets that you need to create those things, or have you been able to
Yeah, that's definitely true with this part. So for a very long time, Sam was filming in her backyard. So we did what we could do outside. And sometimes that would mean relying on props that she had, I think in her basement. There was one moment when Mike Drucker and I, the other head writer, wrote a sketch where she told us, we asked her, what board games do you have? It was the time when we were all playing board games, early pandemic. And she said that she had, I think she maybe said that she had Twister and something else. And so we wrote a little sketch, and then about 5 minutes before she was ready to perform it, she said, I can't find the Twister. And so we had to retool with the Trouble, I think is what she had. But now, yeah, now she's back in the studio, which is really great. So we have a crew there, and we have access to be able to do sketches. Obviously, we try to do things very safely. So it's frequently she's doing those things alone. But we love doing them. And I think one of our favorite shows in recent past was on election day. We filled that thing with sketches because we didn't really know what the results would be and we still didn't know. And so having all of those sketches is really great. We just did things that felt like how we were feeling. I remember one of my favorite sketches was from one of our writers, Sahar Rosie, who wrote a sketch called Mandel. And it was the moment in quarantine when you're so starved for male attention and affection that you light a candle that smells like a man. And so, it's a little different for Stan B and what you think of Full Frontal, but it's really funny. And so we try to look for those opportunities all the time.
Gotcha. I am going to, I've been asked to stop hogging the microphone, and we're going to open it up to some audience questions that are here in the chat. I'm going to read one from Amanda Davis, who asks, as writers of late night shows, do you find that you are entertained by other late night programs, or do you find yourself binging murder documentaries in your downtime? Be honest.
Well, luckily now there's time to do both. Yeah, I mean, I'll speak for myself. I watched the other shows. Initially, we started doing that just to make sure we weren't in the same territory or doing the same jokes. And it became apparent very quickly that that doesn't happen. Like we don't do the same joke Jesus does. That doesn't come up very often. But then you're like, oh shit, this show's great. I'm just gonna watch this without thinking. But yeah, there's also time for murder. And that weird new murder show from Luxembourg. Is anybody watching Kapitani?
No, but I will be 10 minutes after this call ends.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Luxembourg has a television industry? That's fantastic.
Apparently there's a big like north-south rivalry in Luxembourg.
It's the bidding war is on between HBO Max and Apple TV.
Ooh.
Yeah, but
Alex, when you watch shows, if you're watching other shows that are doing anything in the same realm as you, and they do something great, are you able to really enjoy it, or does it depress you? Like I would always feel like demoralized if I felt like, well, we're just.
Yeah, that happens sometimes, and then but my reaction is usually like, oh man, it'd be fun to work there instead. Like we should all be able to like hop around.
Like do a semester abroad at another late night show.
Or trades.
I mean, 90% of the time you're like, oh man, that was great. We could not do that. Yeah. We don't have the resources or the people or the mind frame. So you can just fully enjoy it.
And envy the budget.
Envy the budget or the freedom or the cast.
Got it. Curious, anybody else, is there a type of programming that you go to? Like if you can't watch another monologue couch sketch situation on any show, is there a type of like guilty pleasure show that you go to, like, wipe the slate clean?
Yeah, it's all British murders at this house.
Okay.
I had no idea before the pandemic that there was so many British murder shows. But my partner's mom is from Ireland, and so she's just every couple weeks texts us another one that we need to know about. And it's gotten to the point now where I can't remember which murder happened in which British town. And I'll be like, oh, that Olivia Colman got that guy who blew up the train, right? And my partner will be like, no, Olivia Colman was on Broadchurch, but that bomb was on the train in the other show and I'll be like, okay. But I feel like I don't have, I think, to Michael's point, I feel like when I watch a late night show, I do enjoy watching other late night shows, but I can't turn the critical part of my brain off. And I don't know if the rest of you guys have that, but it's like hard to fully like downshift into relaxing because I'm like, ooh, I love what they did with that setup. Or like, oh man, or I'll see the credits and be like, oh, that friend of mine works there. That's great. Like I can't actually, and I just want to turn, if I want to turn all the way off.
Yeah.
then it has to be something like you know, a hospital show or something where I know nothing about the subject matter.
After you get done with British murders, try British bakers.
Ooh, thank you.
Yes.
Great. Because cooking is another thing I know nothing about. So that'll be, thank you. But what does everybody else watch?
I've been watching the OC. We did Dawson's Creek, and now we're doing the OC. Probably Gossip Girl next. So we've got a theme going.
Old Law and Orders.
Yes.
Are especially great because they, like there was one that centered around a Palm Pilot. There was evidence on somebody's, and one episode ended, the very last line was Green going, I heard next year we're getting blackberries. Hey. Just evidence of a life long lived.
Law and Order. Columbo is all on Peacock. That's been, I will stay up for old Columbos. We watched, the only new thing, it was The Crown, which I was like astonished by how much I couldn't stop watching that.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a very practical question here from Bill Bradley. Perhaps a senator from New Jersey, but also probably a guild member. When it comes to writers' packets, what's the one thing that stands out or sticks with you from prospective candidates? This is a question to you as prospective employers.
I think it's different for all of us, but when I'm reading packets, I want to see someone's voice. I'm looking for a point of view that we may not already have on staff. That's what gets me excited. I think very much the common wisdom is to write exactly like the host, but I think that for me, that doesn't really tell me as much as I need to know. I want to know who you are. And yes, I would love if you know our show, but most importantly, I want to see your point of view, your passion, and your jokes.
Yeah, you want to see what they do. We know what we do.
Yeah.
You know, clearly we already have the people for that. So what do you do?
I really think it seems simpler than it is, but I think there's so much to these things that is personality based and sharing a sense of humor with the people who are there. So I do think the most important thing is just to convey your actual sense of humor. And you might not get the job at the place you're applying to, but it doesn't matter. Like if you don't, then you wouldn't necessarily liked it there. The best thing, because I remember very badly wanting to work at Conan when I was in my early 20s. And then when I got there, I was a wreck because I just felt like I wasn't nearly as funny as the people on that staff. And it took me a while to realize, like, oh, we do share the same sense of humor. Like we have that in common. And you will end up where you belong. I truly believe that. If you're doing something and you really have enthusiasm for it, that is a sign, I think, that you are probably good at it. And that if you can really try to convey what is in you, like Kristen's saying, people will find you who feel the same way.
Do you? I noticed that you all have there's some concentric circles here. A lot of you have worked for Seth Meyers, of course, SNL, The Crucible. Is there? I know there's a real tight knit group of late night producers and writers. Is there a sense of, do you ever feel maybe pigeonholed as a late night writer? Is that something that you're concerned about, given that it is such a tight knit world of people in late night?
Go ahead.
I feel safe and happy in my pigeonhole. I'm not trying to sell romance novels. Like, I'm very good here.
I hope not. We'll find out in 5 years.
That's the truest answer you could give.
Yeah, it's not like if people are as good at writing jokes as, like some of the people here, it's an amazing way to make a living.
I have a question from viewer Jill Peters, who has a question for you, Michael. Does John Wilson get everybody to sign appearance releases?
Yeah. I mean, John doesn't personally do that, but yeah, I think there are situations where it's necessary and situations where it isn't. But certainly, anytime somebody is speaking or is the clear subject of a shot, then they do. And yeah, there's someone on the staff who's really good at approaching those people.
Is that something, another question that came in was also about like the sense of on how to, a lot of the encounters appear to be spontaneous.
Mhm.
Is that the case, or is there a little more stagecraft behind the scenes?
No, I mean, I worked on a show before this that also was completely based on interacting with real people, and you can't, if someone's not an actor, and you cannot discuss something with them ahead of time and expect anything approaching natural behavior or spontaneity. So it really is luck when somebody delivers more than you could have anticipated. And you have to write an episode in a way that does not account for luck, and you in the worst case scenario, you would still have a complete episode and with events, but what really makes it good in the best cases is something that was just purely unanticipated and becomes real, and you're watching it for the first time when it happens, in my experience.
I think, well, we're just about out of time. I think given the audience, it's an old chestnut of a writer's panel question, but it's still a good one. Let's just go around the horn here and give us a sense of like, what was your big break in the sense of what was the piece of work that you did that you think was the was that first stepping stone to being respected and recognized as a comedy writer, since this is a Writers Guild of America East panel? What was that breakthrough, which may not be the same thing as your big break in terms of getting your first big TV gig, but what was the piece of work that was good and recognized, that was like, hey, this guy or gal has potential? Michael, I'll pick on you.
This is before I was actually working on anything professionally.
Or just
Is that what you
a
mean?
piece of writing that you think was significant in terms of your development as a comedy writer?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind, Alex mentioned Law and Order early, but I was at Conan and I'd been there for a little while, and I was very insecure, just way more than was even justified. I was could hardly function. And I did a piece about like an award show that was just for Law and Order. Like it was like the Emmys, but just for Law and Order. And it worked well enough. I like stayed up all night editing for it, and then it did well. And it was the first time that I had real confidence that you could sit down and just plow straight through something using your best judgment, and that my decisions would not be just all look like mistakes once they got to the floor, and that I could trust myself. So it was enormous in terms of just making me relax. But I think yeah, to me it's writing something that you don't have time to think, so you use your instincts more, and just to find out that your instincts you can trust them, I think is an enormous moment for me.
That's great. Thank you. I'm gonna go find that clip. Kristen?
Sure. The thing I think that was my sort of entry into this world is I wrote a show called The Dead Dads Club that I performed at the Upright Citizens Brigade Theater in 2014, 2015. And it was this half-hour sketch and storytelling show about grief, because my husband and I lost our dads within a 4-month period. And we went on this sort of grief journey together. And one of the things that really got us through it was finding the darkly hilarious moments that come when you've lost someone, which I think is a universal experience. And many years after that happened, I was able to put that into a show. And I think people really connected with it. And it's something that opened up a lot of doors for me. And it also was the moment that I really realized the thing that I love most in comedy is writing from a place of truth and honesty and real feelings and emotion. And that kind of clicked forever, I think.
Oh, awesome. That's great. Mike?
I mean, I didn't this is tough, but I really always knew I wanted to be a writer, but I didn't really think of myself as like as a particularly funny person or a comedy writer until it was literally the first thing I got paid for as a writer was submitting headlines to the Onion, and then they started a video, like right at the exact time that I happened to be emailing them. They started a video channel online in like 2007 or something, when web videos were the future. And just the process of getting a couple headlines on there, and then after a couple months somebody left and they were like, do you want to come join our writers group? And then going to like sit in that room, and it was definitely the first time but not the last where I was like, I am the least funny person in this room, and these are all brilliant people, and I am so terrified. So that was like probably the thing that I just think of as cementing that for me.
Awesome. Jenny?
Similar to Kristen, I wrote a one-woman show. I wrote it when I was very young, and it was like, for no reason, nobody asked me for it. Nobody wanted it. It wasn't for a job. In fact, at the time I was working as a secretary / admin assistant. And I would just go, I got like 45 minutes for lunch, and I would go across the street to Starbucks, and I would write on a legal pad that I probably stole from that job. And I just wrote a bunch of like comedic songs, and then I ended up putting them together in like a hat. I don't even play guitar that well. Like, nobody needed this, but it was like funny to me. And it was like all these songs about like dating and my stupid little 22-year-old life. And it was very specific to me. And I think at the end I did a slideshow of like all my ex-boyfriends, but with like black bars over their eyes. Like, nobody needed this show, but it was like very specific to my dumb little life at the time. And I wrote it and I put it up at the Improv Olympic in Chicago. And then somehow Amy Poehler heard about it and invited me to do it at UCB in New York when that was like new, because I'm very old. And then somehow Second City in Chicago heard that I'd been invited to UCB, and that sounded fancy to them, so they hired me. And like I'm telling you, probably, I don't think I did this show like a bunch of times, and I don't think at any point more than 12 people were ever watching it at the same time. But I think it was that thing of like, I wrote this thing that only because it was funny to me, not because I thought it was going to get me something, not because I thought, oh, this will get so-and-so's attention, or this is what's cool to do right now, or what everybody wants is a guitar-based dating show. No, but it was like, I wrote it just because it was a thing that was in my dumb little heart. And then it happened to have these nice unintended consequences. And it was so specific. And I was like, this will not talk to anybody. And then like after the show, everybody'd be like, I feel like you wrote it about my life. So I feel like it was a good lesson for me, and like, write the thing you want to write. And also a good lesson in that like the specific is universal. Like, to get back to like, I think a question you were asking like a while ago, Cynthia, about like I think like there's no such thing as a universal joke, but very specific jokes end up accidentally touching a lot of people. So I feel like those were like, and then like from there I ended up getting hired by Second City and actually starting to like be a professional comedy person. But I feel like it was such a lovely, like that was what started things, but also it was like a really good, like two really important lessons. Like, write whatever nerdy little thing you think is funny and be as specific as you can about your life, because someone else is having the same dumb life. That's how I want to land this.
Some in a similar way. That's awesome. Alex, take it away. Take us home.
Oh boy. I was in a sketch group in college. I fell backwards into this weird sketch group. And so I thought forever that I was a sketch writer and that I was really good at it, because in college, everybody left. So I submitted to SNL a bunch of times. I finally got an interview, and they were like, oh, close, but we're not going to hire you, but go home and you can fax jokes to Weekend Update if you want. And I was like, well, I've never tried to write jokes, like 2-line topical jokes, but all right, I'll see what I can do. And so I went home and I watched Weekend Update every week, and I like reverse engineered my favorite jokes from every episode until I kind of figured out how they operate and started sending jokes in. And I did that for 6 years. Didn't get a joke on the first year. Second year got like a joke on. And by the 6th year, I had a joke on every week. And they called me up and they're like, hey, you didn't send a packet this year. What's up? And I was like, well, you're clearly not going to hire me. And they're like, well, we are hiring you. And that's how I ended up on writing for a Weekend Update. And I've now been in this building for 17 years, and I think I've written 4 sketches. And maybe 1 was on TV. But yeah, I had to get redirected. Yeah, it all worked out.
That's
So
awesome. What's great about these stories is everybody has their lane, but the clear theme is write what you love, write from passion, and write jokes with truth. It is so true. It sounds so easy, but so true. Thank you all so much. Thank you for the laughs. Sincerely, I mean this. Thank you for the laughs. Desus and Mero, Amber, I mean, Seth, all of them have at various times. I think people have really during this period, the stuff you love, because it's our friends, it's our companions. And seriously, late night has taken on such a big, it's always been a big part of pop culture, but it's never been bigger. And it's fascinating. It's a fascinating arena. And you all are in the trenches, great practitioners. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.